Hey Jamie, I've been working on your Akimbo for about a week. Took it down to Panama and I climbed trees for a week down there. I've been giving it a lot of thought. In this video, I'm just going to talk a little bit about naming the parts and maybe touch on one little concept when it comes to a change. But I have a lot of other ideas too, but I want to try to limit things to a bit at a time. I tend to get a little carried away sometimes. First of all, as far as naming the parts, now I know you've already gone through a lot of that and you've given it some thought yourself. I may just mention that I think your perspective is probably one from a manufacturer, which is the way it should be and the way it is. So what I am going to give you some thoughts on is more of a naming the parts based on the user. So looking at your Akimbo, the first thing I would probably talk about is the top, this guy. And I'm kind of thinking that looks like and works like a handbrake. So that's what you use. If you want to stop coming down the rope, use the handbrake. And these would be the side plates to the handbrake. On the handbrake is the adjustable bollard. Call it the upper bollard, but I give this a name of a sheave so it doesn't really confuse it to anything else. But so you could call that an adjustable bollard. This I would call the upper friction block or the upper spring-loaded friction block. And working down, I like what you call the spline. Here I would call this the, well, I think you already did, but the tending shackle. And then we work down to the main friction block or the friction body and the anchor attachment hole. And of course now you have the side plates for the main friction body. And then the adjustable sheave. That pretty much, oh, and then we've got, I'd call these the locking swing arms, because that's really what they do, is they lock those pins in and they're kind of in the shape of an arm and they swing. I think you call them pretty much the same thing, but so locking swing arm. And I have some thoughts too when it comes to the security of those, but another time. Also the anchor. Well, anyway, I've given it a lot of thought. I'm going to have a lot of stuff to talk about, but I can't do it in one video. So that would be naming most of the parts without much confusion, and I think it's fairly clear. Now what I would talk about is the configurations. And let me take the rope out so it's easier to hold. I would call this the change mode. And in the change mode, the stars need to be aligned. When the stars are all aligned, you can change the mode. The first mode, well, let's do this. The first mode really is the running mode. This is the mode that people are going to be using when they're on rope. So you go back to the change mode, you can open it up and go to the installation mode where you're going to route the rope. Now, of course, on the back side of the installation mode, whether you get to it from the change mode or from the installation mode, is the adjustment mode. When you move the swing arms, it exposes the adjustment pins. To me, there's really only one way to look at these when you're making that adjustment. I mean, you can, as you know, you'll be moving around, but when you're looking in these holes, there's no doubt as to where those pins are, and it helps maintain orientation. Now, I know you mentioned counting from 1 to 6 and the distance from the friction point. What I think might become confusing is guys aren't going to remember whether you're counting from left to right or right to left, or if you're counting towards the friction block or away from the friction block. And the fact that that's opposite on each side gets a little bit confusing. What I'm going to suggest, well, anyway, so those are the modes: the change mode, the installation mode, and the adjustment mode. What I'm going to suggest is, and maybe you've already tried this, move over here where I've done a little chalk diagram. If you look at these things, and if you think of that as a clock, for those of us that still look at a clock dial, it's pretty easy to, and without confusion, they do that in the military when they're calling out, you know, watch your 6 o'clock and all that kind of stuff. There's no confusion as to where that is. And what I've drawn here is a configuration that would give you actually 8 adjustment holes, and it would give you the positions of 12 o'clock, 1:30, 3 o'clock, 4:30, 6, 7:30, 9 o'clock, and 10:30. There's really no confusion about that. And it can be, if you said it was the upper 3 o'clock and the lower 3 o'clock, or the upper 3 o'clock and the lower 9 o'clock, there really is going to be no confusion on that, whatever. Now, because this gets into a little bit of a build concept, I'm going to mention this. What you still end up with is your ability to adjust the distance between, in this case, the bollard and the upper friction block, and down here the distance between the sheave and the main friction body. But what this gives you is also a little change in angle. And I know you'll understand this, but the distance alone is achieved with this rotation. If you go all the way around, for example, if you look at your lower sheave, if you go all the way around, you can have the same distance between the sheave and the lower friction body, but by changing where those holes are, you can actually change the leverage as to where that occurs. You'd have to test it and try it and see where that comes out as far as what the ultimate effect is. But I think that the leverage and that angle, especially on this lower friction body, is going to become very important. And it's kind of something that I'm investigating, and I'll get back with you on that when I learn more. But I think you get the point, in that you've only added 2 more holes. You've made the configuration pretty easy to translate the information without it being confused. And you've added 2 more holes. Probably have not affected the strength at all. I don't know how that's going to be on what you're doing, but probably not affected the strength at all. And as far as putting the holes in it and manufacturing, I don't think there's much of an adjustment there either. Anyway, see if that kind of covers what I wanted to talk about. I just wanted to talk about naming the parts. I think that's going to be a big deal for everybody. And naming the configurations and naming the settings. So keep up the good work, and I'll keep getting back to you. Got lots more to look at and investigate. So, all right. Thanks.